And we need awareness. We need politicians to come together. We need politicians to understand the technology. We need people to just understand that this is not a lightweight issue.
Hello, and welcome to Environment Variables, brought to you by the Green Software Foundation. In each episode, we discuss the latest news and events surrounding green software. On our show, you can expect candid conversations with top experts in their field who have a passion for how to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of software.
Hello, and welcome to Environment Variables and the Week in Green Software, or TWiGS. This is where we break down the stories shaping sustainable software and greener computing. I'm Kate, and today I'm joined once again by Tzviya. This week we're looking at big tech transparency on the road to a fossil-free internet, why open source is pushing carbon-aware computing towards the mainstream cloud, and what new research and policy signals are telling us about the true environmental cost of AI and digital infrastructure. So let's jump in. Our first piece is quite exciting and an amazing visual read as well, because it comes from the Green Web Foundation, and it's their first annual report, The State of Fossil-Free Internet 2026. And it looks at what's blocking progress towards a fossil-free internet with a very strong focus on big tech, scale out of data centers, and transparency. And so the big theme is that we can't manage what we can't see. And right now, consistent disclosures about energy sourcing and infrastructure impact are still quite patchy. It's also a reminder that net zero narratives can hide big gaps if the underlying data isn't comparable or complete. So to start us off, it's a big read, Tzviya, but maybe you could share a couple of the things that stood out to you from this entire report.
Sure. First of all, it's just really exciting to see this. I encourage everybody to go read it. It's not a complicated read, but there's a ton of information in it, and it's beautiful. I want to start off saying a real congratulations to the Green Web Foundation for producing this. It's a visual masterpiece. There's a ton of information in not a ton of words, and I really encourage everybody to take a look at this.
So first, let's dive a little bit into some of the main topics of the report. So it really highlights one big problem, which is that there's too many dirty data centers controlled by companies that are not held accountable. So it highlights this problem, and then it breaks it down into 3 solution pathways. So pathway 1 is to reduce the energy demand. So the idea here is keep within our planetary boundaries. And one theme of this is sufficiency, not efficiency. And that's a quote that we absolutely loved from this report, was that as a society, we need to think about what is sufficient instead of always driving towards efficiency gains. Because as we'll talk about later in this podcast, because of Jevons paradox, efficiency doesn't always lead to reduction in carbon emissions. And so, first pathway was reduce the energy demand. Second pathway is green the energy. So how do we cut ties with fossil fuel? And it really points out that we don't need fossil fuels. Already, over 40% of the web is powered by green energy. We have proven that it works, and we should keep focusing on that. And then the third is democratize tech. So how do we think about making it so that there's new ideas of what it means to own tech? And how do we create policy around this? And so within each of those, it breaks it out further. And it's really enticing to dive into each of them. So for example, if we dive into green the energy, which is one we talk about a fair bit, you can think about there's new technology out there. Like there's one company that stood out to me called Wind Cores. It's a German company that places data centers inside wind turbines, which got me excited from a CDN perspective. It made me dream up, what if we had a content delivery network that was just windmills all over the place with servers inside of it? But anyways, I want to go into a deep dive with Wind Cores. It calls out that you can engage as a citizen to help green the energy. So make legal challenges against things, lobby for against gas connections to grids, and then supporting public infrastructure and keeping those infrastructure changes public. And it also talks a little bit about the trade-offs governments are making and choosing to build data centers over other public resources like health centers, schools, etc. So that's just an overview. Maybe it'll tantalize you to read deeper. But one thing I wanted to talk a little bit more about, Tzviya, is some of the math that was mentioned in this article and why some of the accounting incentives that big hyperscalers have been using to offset their carbon emissions doesn't really work. So specifically, a lot of the hyperscalers, so you think big tech, so the ones that are really emphasized in this report are Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. So they really break down the emissions of those companies. And a lot of those companies say that they're reaching or they're reaching their own net zero targets. But in reality, what they're doing is they're using fossil fuels, but offsetting it with certificates.
Are you saying offsets don't work?
I am saying offsets don't work. And specifically, I'm saying renewable energy certificates don't always work. And I would love, Tzviya, to hear your perspective on maybe why those don't work.
Well, that was sarcasm. I think sarcasm is well on a podcast than in writing. So I'm pretty familiar with offsets not working. And in preparing for this, Chris Adams pointed us to an episode of this, of one of the green variables, environmental variables podcast that he had done with earlier, and we'll drop the link in the show notes, with somebody whose name I can't recall right now. Do you have
it? Was with Killian Daly or Daly. And yeah,
he was explaining basically about how it's about time and place more than anything else. If you're storing your solar from the daytime and you can claim that you're using solar energy at night, then something's not adding up. And that's not, we're not even talking about planting trees and that offsetting your carbon use, because that also doesn't work, because you're still burning the fuel, you're still using natural gas or oil or whatever that may be. And the math, as I saw in your notes, Kate, isn't mathing. It's not about, there's no equation here where, like, you're not balancing an equation. It's not I burn 3 tons of carbon in the morning and I replace it with three tons of solar in the evening. It doesn't work like that. We're not able to offset it in that way. Maybe at one point in time we thought that offsets like that worked, but it doesn't work that way. We have to be using the energy in the same place in the same time. So the other thing that was discussed in that podcast is that if the grids that we have sketched out in the world right now are kind of wacky. The size is mind-blowing. The whole United States is considered one grid. All of Europe is considered one grid. So if, Iceland is generally considered a really clean energy zone, but if I am in Ireland or Germany or Croatia or whatever it is, I can buy my power from Iceland and call that clean. But how does it get there? And when is it getting there? And we talk a lot about carbon shifting, but we don't talk about the practicalities of it and what energy is being used to get it there. And I hope I understood that well, but we really need to talk about the practicalities of this.
Yeah, and so to dive into what you're saying of I can buy my energy, the way renewable energy certificates work is that when a renewable energy company creates a megawatt hour of electricity, it not only creates that physical energy, but it also creates one of these RECs or renewable energy certificates that another company can now buy. And the idea is that another company can buy it to offset a megawatt hour of carbon energy. And the idea is the idea when it was created, the hope was that these RECs would be a source of an income stream for these energy producers so that they then could make their green projects more profitable, and it would encourage them to develop more solar panels and turbines and expand their operations. But in reality, it's not working that way. And the extra money doesn't actually trigger the construction of a new wind farm. It was going to be built anyway. And so that's kind of why the math isn't mathing here. And Kevin and Chris Adams and Killian Daly go into more detail in that podcast that Tzviya was talking about, in the sense that that in the podcast that you were just talking about, Tzviya, in the sense that it's not only that Recs don't math, it's also that they're way unbound. And so you mentioned that the time isn't bound, so you're not offsetting your hour with an exact hour somewhere. The location, it's not grid bound when it should be. So we should be focused on keeping every grid sustainable, instead of some grids are super dirty and others are super clean, like you mentioned Iceland, and or you mentioned Greenland, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned Greenland. And
I believe Iceland is considered one of the cleanest energy places, but I might be misremembering.
I would like to know, maybe Greenland also is.
Not
but
sure. Yeah,
I'm not sure.
On a boat trip.
Yeah. And then they also mentioned how when you bring in another part we should be considering is that we're funding new supplies, not offsetting with old supplies of renewable energy, because we should be making forward momentum through these accounting incentives. But yeah, I thought it was funny that they mentioned that you can buy Iceland hydropower from a place such as Germany, even though Iceland has never exported electricity to anyone. Like, there's no cables leaving Iceland. And it's just an example of how contrived some of this accounting is. And that was a rabbit hole that the State of Fossil Free Internet brought me down, because I didn't fully understand how RECs work. And understanding them really does make you squint even deeper at these sustainability reports from hyperscalers. And it makes you concerned, because we're not actually achieving progress. And one of the other parts of the State of Fossil Free Internet was that it was showing how the amount of data centers being built is accelerating incredibly fast, especially due to AI. And so I personally found the report a bit disheartening.
Yeah, there were aspects of it that were disheartening. However, I'll say that the report left me optimistic as well, because we are, as always, when we talk about sustainability, at a flashpoint. Having just this report makes me think of things like State of the Browser, the Web A Million. These reports are annually anticipated. They are a way to measure what we're doing. And if we have something like this, State of the Fossil Free Internet annually, people, just like looking forward to those other reports, will look forward to State of the Fossil Free Internet. And all of those are used as they're used in two ways. They're used for people to check in on how others are doing, and check in on how they're doing themselves. There's a little bit of data shaming. It's public, right? Everybody looks at them, and standards organizations use them to see how the organizations that use their standards are doing. And hopefully people will start to look at these organizations, will start to look at this Fossil Free Internet report and see how they're doing. We talk all the time about how without reporting and without metrics, without standards, it's really hard to advance. And that's part of the call to action here, right? Get involved. Politics is part of what can make this happen. Stop the greenwashing, because that's a large part of what's happening here. Like you were explained so carefully, Kate. A lot of what's happening here is we have these large organizations claiming to head towards sustainability, where in fact they're a large part of the problem. And if we can publicize this information, make people understand that when they make a cute little picture with ChatGPT or whatever AI tool they're using, they're contributing to the problem, and get people up in arms about it.
Yeah.
What are the pieces of guidance at the end here is limit or skip AI. If only everybody could understand that was a large part of the problem.
Yeah, I hear that as start to acquire the ick for AI, and I could see that. And also your point about this is annual, and so we're going to be annually holding companies accountable. There's one table that seems quite unhelpful because it is so void, because we're doing so poorly, and that is the how transparent are Google, Amazon, Microsoft about fossil fuels and their cloud services. And it computes an overall transparency score, and it has counting right now, 12 boxes on it of various ways that these companies could be sharing information to achieve different levels of transparency. Every single one has a 0%, except for one of the 12 boxes, and that is that Google Cloud discloses their use of carbon-free energy on an hourly basis. The Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure do not do that at all, and every other box is empty. So maybe if sustainability teams at those companies get some pressure from consumers or socially to start improving this transparency score, next year these boxes will look different. But I think that does require us to spread this report around. We need this report to be well known and well seen in order to create that up pressure.
And then, of course, regulation comes into this as well. Without clearer requirements around what reporting means, I'm not sure that this will actually happen.
Yeah, I agree. Regulation would be the most fast and foolproof way to get there.
But I do think that our next topic is a good, it flows right into the next topic because, our next two topics actually, because we have a few more articles that talk about how publicizing information really helps with sustainability. Why don't you move on to Article 2?
Yeah. So on that note, this is our next article is called Cloud Sustainability at Scale: Why Open Source Will Define the Next Era of Green Computing. And it's by Nikki Manolidaki. And this paper really focuses on what open source software and standards are available right now for you to start measuring the carbon intensity of your software stack. And it basically makes the argument that the tooling is there. Go deploy it in your cloud platforms and start measuring your current state and progress. And to talk about some of the tools, one of the main ones mentioned is Kepler, which is a CNCF project that Nikki maintains, which uses eBPF and machine learning to estimate workload level power consumption, so at a process level, from Kubernetes resources. And you add to that KEIT, Kubernetes Emissions Insight Tools, which is this power kit that deploys Kepler and it uses electricity maps and other tools to basically take the information Kepler is gathering, use the software carbon intensity formula and electricity maps information to give you a sense of the exact carbon that your platform is using. So it's a really great way to read this and say, we're here and I should start using these tools.
I think one of the things that excites me about this is that a year ago at Green.io, people were talking about the stack that was available, and it was basically electricity maps, and Psi for AI was in the works, and now it's so much more advanced, and that's just 1 year of progress, which amazes me. And we have guidelines that are coming out. The whole world is working on sustainability guidelines, it feels like to me. IEEE, IETF, W3C, the Green Software Foundation. It's so exciting. And the problems that are discussed in this article also underline the problems that exist in the broader open source world. I'll just a quote here: "The sustainability of AI therefore hinges not only on engineering efficiencies, but also on business incentives, governance and policy, market pressures, cultural norms, and expectations." So sustaining the open source world has been in the hands of all of these pressures for years. You can say this about Drupal, you can say this about just about anything. You can say this about the entire organization that I work for, the W3C. Basically, people volunteer to do these things, and it's up to market pressures. If somebody runs out of time, for example, if somebody says to me, I don't have the cycles because I have a project and it's about time to market, not the greater good, that is what happens. And we do need to rely on incentives, and whether that is about Shell funding Microsoft or the U.S. government working with the AI developers, or what AI companies, I should say, we have to think about how we can put more of our intention into the survival of the planet than into the survival of our pocketbooks.
Yeah, I think that really brings us back to the sufficiency, not efficiency. Really asking ourselves what is sufficient is what is needed for the planet. What is efficient, it might be needed for your checkbooks. We talk a lot about how green software reduces your operating costs. But in other terms, it increases your capacity. So you just end up doing more. And that's something that Nikki also points out in this. One quote that she shares or she writes is, while efficiency is one approach, it also introduces another complication. Efficiency gains in AI can actually increase total energy consumption, a modern expression of Jevons paradox. Making AI more efficient can make it cheaper, thus accelerating the adoption, increasing overall compute demand. If you're not familiar with the Jevons paradox, it was created by Stanley Jevons in 1865, and it was created regarding coal usage. So the idea that as you got more efficient at creating coal and producing coal, then coal became cheaper, so more people bought coal, and you actually started having more carbon output from coal. So similarly, as you make software platforms and AI more efficient, then it's cheaper and more people are going to start using AI because why not? Just throw AI at it. It's so cheap. And so I think one of the key points here is use those measurement tools so you know that as you grow and scale, so is your carbon growing and scaling, and understanding, what is the carbon bottom line that you keep hitting here.
I'll just add, by the way, while we're talking about the price of AI, one thing that we are starting to see is that the price of AI is actually going up. It's something people have been predicting for a long time, but it's starting to happen in the real world now. I heard this week that I believe it's Opus by Claude, if I'm remembering correctly, had a price increase this week. So Jevons paradox aside, which I think we've noted is the theme of today's episode, the prices are starting to go up in real time as the use is going up for the AI tools that are starting to be taken for granted. The companies that are providing them are starting to understand that they can begin to charge for them because they've been taken for granted, which is exactly what people have been predicting since this bubble started to expand.
Yeah, and it might also be that these AI companies are being required to turn profits for once. None of them are profitable yet. So it could be, it's almost has nothing to do with Jevons because it's not about their efficiency. It's about the monetary, it's about their funding and their investors. But what you're referring to with Opus, I believe, is they released Opus 4.7 and they charge 7 times more for Opus than they do for Sonnet 4.6, or Opus 4.6, they charge 3 times of Sonnet. So basically it's 7 times more tokens per query than if you used one of their still high reasoning models. But they're basically charging a premium for the latest, which I think it'll be curious to see if people pay for it. I am curious if Opus 4.7 is currently being used more than 4.6, despite the charge.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch.
With that, I think we can move on to our next topic. This is a paper, and it is called Counting Own Goals. It is a high-level assessment of the economic relationship between the ICT and oil and gas sectors and its environmental implications. So it's looking at the economics of the financial relationship between the information communications and technology industry, ICT, and the oil and gas industry. And it really highlights a troubling imbalance. So one of the key facts it points to is that for every $1 the information communication technology industry, so the digital industry, directs towards renewables, they direct more than $4 to oil and gas. So they are putting more investment into the oil and gas industry than they are than the renewable industry, despite overall investment in the renewable industry being higher than that of oil and gas currently. And the point here isn't that tech has emissions, it's that the capital allocation and financing choices, that those capital allocation and financing choices can undermine climate goals even when companies have strong sustainability messaging. So it's a useful lens into anyone trying to square software enables decarbonization with what the sector might be enabling on the other side of the ledger. And it's interesting because we think about what is this software using? We don't think about what in my accounting checkbook, where is my money investing and the externalities of the money that I am putting somewhere. And that's what this paper looks at, is not just money, but my outputs in general. So it talks about how the technology that companies produce cause more extraction in the oil and gas industry, which therefore causes more carbon output. And that's kind of the effect that it really drills into. And it's advocating for us to be tracking that.
Thanks, Kate. This was such an exciting article for me to read. It's very reminiscent of Will and Holly Alpine's enabled emissions campaign, which I've heard them refer to as Scope 4 emissions. I would love to find a way for GHG to consider a way to report on this, document this, as the article states, to understand the overall environmental impact of oil and gas digitization. We need to consider potential avoided and added emissions. And another quote that's just like kind of mind-blowing is the CEO of Saudi Aramco, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, the world's largest oil company, recently estimated that AI could double oil rig productivity. So this is something that if you've been around this space for a while, you've heard Will and Holly speak about, saying that, you know, Microsoft's biggest partners are the oil and gas companies, Microsoft in particular, in their AI tooling. This is, as we're, our theme today, this is Jevons paradox in action. However, based on this article, it sounds like the tech for the gas and oil is somewhat immature, but they're hoping for some magic digitization that will rescue them. And they're investing hugely in these tools, meaning they're also putting a lot of time, effort, resources, tooling, which is also a lot of waste, into this. And there are examples that are frighteningly mature, like clear increases in oil and gas production in the order of like 50,000 barrels a day of shale that have come about using AI.
I want to dive into that example, the 50,000 barrels example, because that is one that they lay out in detail in the article. And I think they look at two case studies of exact input-output scenarios where a tech company worked in creating some sort of technology that increased either the extraction or the refining output of another company. So one of them that you mentioned was Microsoft in 2019 announced a partnership with XTO Energy, which is a subsidiary of ExxonMobil. And basically they developed an IoT solution with sensors and gateways that made it so that XOT's energy daily barrel production increased by 50,000 extra barrels a day, or it had the potential to increase by that much per day by 2025. And the authors of this paper used the total barrel per day extraction as a denominator and put 50,000 over it, and that led to a 5% increase in production was caused by this technological innovation that was shared with XTO Energy. And when you do that math, it then gets to the point where the yearly additional emissions of this single project for XTO Energy would represent 43% of the market-based emissions of Microsoft's total 2024 emissions. So of what Microsoft reports as their 2024 emissions, this one project was 43% of it, an equivalent carbon creation. But it's not accounted for in our current greenhouse gas reporting emissions.
It's just absolutely mind-blowing. And I do wonder, I know that enabled emissions is trying to get recognition, trying to document this sort of thing. And I love the term enabled emissions because we have scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Would this be scope 4? Would it somehow be worked into scope 2? Because it sort of fits with scope 2, right? Where it's talking about you measure emissions from purchased and acquired electricity, but it's not purchased or acquired. It's what you're enabling another organization to do. And at a certain point, people say, okay, so how far down the line does your reporting go? But this kind of example is so troubling, so complicated. It's not so complicated. It's actually pretty well laid out in this article. This is the first time I've seen an article that lays it out in this level of detail, with such explicit examples, and that's why I'm so excited about this article. And I wonder what we can do with this. Can we go to GHG? Like, it is an organization. They document things. They do update the standards. There was, not that long ago, I think, an update, a tweak really to Scope 2. I can't remember off the top of my head what it was, but I wonder where we go with this. I'm excited.
Me too. Cheers to the School of Engineering in Edinburgh for putting this out. It came out on April 29th, so just last week. So a new and an enticing read, and I would highly. It's actually a very quick read too. For a research paper, I feel like I was able to get through all the pages with joy. So I would recommend.
There's no fire math in it.
Yeah, there was no summation equations, which did help.
It was, I think, only like 11 or 12 pages, so not
Yeah.
too.
Okay, so to wrap it up, I think we can go to our last article, which is a Politico article about how the UK government had to revise their AI data center emission forecast by 100 times. So their forecasts were 100 times lower than their actual annual AI data center emissions were projected to be. So this really raises questions about how governments are planning for AI growth while staying aligned with their net zero goals. So the UK has net zero goals that are just looking infeasible when things are 100 times more, emit 100 times more than they expected. And the bigger story here is really uncertainty and undercounting. So if official forecasts can swing this widely, it's a signal that our measurement methods, assumptions, and transparency is just not keeping up with the pace of this infrastructure build out. And for software and ML teams, it really enforces that the efficiency work is not just nice to have, but part of a larger capacity problem. So when we're talking about efficiency here, we mean let's build software that we don't need as much data centers and we can just use one data center, but we might hit the Jevons paradox there. So a little bit of a wiggle there once again.
Yeah, I mean, this article kind of sums up everything we've been talking about for the last several minutes. We need accountability, we need reporting, we need standards, we need regulation, and we need awareness. We need politicians to come together. We need politicians to understand the technology. We need people to just understand that this is not a lightweight issue. It kind of just brings everything in. And it's sad, it's unfortunate, but if legislation can change this easily, then where are we?
Yeah, and I will say that the UK government was saying that they still want to reach their goals and that they're reviewing this offshoot, how they did not hit their targets. And so at least that response shows some hope to maybe redirect and course correct here. But it is sad to know that, we're so off on our measurements and we really need to do better there.
Yeah.
I think that gets us to the end of our topics for today. We covered a lot from what transparency could really look like on the path to a fossil-free internet, why open source technology is helping us make carbon-aware decisions, and how the growing gap between fast AI infrastructure and how fast AI infrastructure is expanding, and that's impacting our ability to do proper accounting. We also discussed enabled emissions and how we need to focus on that more, how we should be thinking more about sufficiency, not efficiency. And we talked about the Jevons paradox with regards to efficiency gains aren't always the vector for change that we're looking for. So thank you all for tuning in, and thanks Tzviya for the great discussion. And if you want to keep exploring, check the links that we've mentioned in the show notes. And you can also visit podcast.greensoftware.foundation to listen to even more episodes of Environment Variables. We will see you all next time. Bye for now.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Just a reminder to follow Environment Variables on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please do leave a rating and review if you like what we're doing. It helps other people discover the show, and of course, we'd love to have more listeners. To find out more about the Green Software Foundation, please visit greensoftware.foundation. That's greensoftware.foundation in any browser. Thanks again, and see you in the next episode.